show up, and if not, we could just do the updates. What do you say?
That should be good. And by the time he's done, I'll be done with my pizza. As I said, I'm celebrating Pi Day.
As long as you didn't get it with pineapple on it, that's okay.
No, no, no. I'm a traditionalist.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Well, it's promptly 6. Oh, let me just turn this off. It's 6:30. So let's see. Okay, and Stephen is here. So you know what? So why don't you do that quickly, Zachary, and then we'll go right to Stephen.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except for committee co-chairs Craig and Alita and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not the wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support.
Thank you, Zachary. So I'm Alita Camp. My co-chair is Craig Lader. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have invited chairs of either the full board or transportation committee from our neighboring community boards to join us. And I believe we have Stephen Brown here. He has to leave in a few minutes. He seems to have disappeared. Oh, there he is. Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay. Oh, and you're already unmuted. Is there anyone else? If you're here from any other community board, please raise your hand so we know that you're here. Okay, well, you can do that while Stephen's talking. Stephen, thank you so much for coming. Would you share your board's concerns or excitement or anticipation or all of the above?
Well, I'll do my best, and it may not be as exciting as that, but I can give you a little bit of an update and a little bit of our kind of where we're at, and it's a little bit simple and straightforward, but I certainly can do that. And we'd had a conversation, and I do have a little bit more time. We have a housing committee meeting at the same time, and it's there's an important agenda item that's going to be the second one, so I'd like to get over for that. But as a background. Well, again, I'm Stephen Brown. I'm the chair of Community Board 7. Thank you for having me. And in its simplest terms, I'll speak kind of for the position our community board has taken, maybe some update in where we're at, and maybe in terms of perhaps some future steps that we may take. So we have taken it, and Alita, I sent you the resolution, and I don't know if you want to share that. But we are in favor of congestion pricing, and the community board passed a resolution, a very simple, straightforward resolution stating that we support that. I would note a couple things. That resolution is dated 2018, and I think so. That's sort of one of the overwhelming or things to be discussed is a lot has changed since 2018. So. As a whole, our official position is supporting congestion pricing. I believe we still support congestion pricing, but I do think that a lot has happened since then, whether it be COVID, whether it be the really positive funding that's coming through to the MTA and how that may affect the need that drove a lot of that. There was a large financial need for the MTA, and this is a way to fund it. So I do think there are some nascent conversations that people are starting to have and other board members are having. And that is, again, as a whole, we support congestion pricing, but I think there are concerns. And some of those concerns are, does this make and we're largely the Upper West Side, what will that do to our own parking? Are a lot of people going to park in our areas and then take cabs downtown? And what does that look to businesses? So I think all the things that you're looking at are our concern. And whether it's time for us to have another conversation about that. There's been a little bit of conversation about that. But I think we take two different measures. We've been acting in two different ways around issues, and we struggle sometimes as well. I'm curious how you approach them. Sometimes we struggle to say, we know this is coming and we want to comment before it happens. And then there's a camp of saying, well, let's wait to hear what's happening and then comment after that. So I think we're kind of struggling is what's the next step? That's a long-winded sort of version, but I think, again, in summary, we're in support of congestion pricing. There's lots of questions about how that will impact Community Board 7. And there has been some conversations about should we be looking at that again, similar to the way you're looking at it, just based on there's lots of different things. I'll pause there if there's any questions or if what I need clarification in anything I said.
Okay, well, let's put up, just because it is brief, I agree, your resolution on screen. I sent it to Zachary, and we could put it up just so that folks could see what it looks like. We have, as you know, we have a number of resolutions, including something that looks similar to that, also from pre-speed of getting congestion pricing out there. So do you have, or has your board, before we turn to members of the public and the board, I just have one, I guess, overarching question. What kinds, if any, concerns has your board raised?
Well, a couple of them, as I mentioned. I mean, what does this do to parking, right? So are we going to have a lot of people that park on 67th Street and take a cab downtown? We already have a lot of conversations about parking and curbside use. So what does that do to that conversation? So I think that's one example. Again, I think there's overall conversations about how that may affect the city, not just Community Board 7, but businesses. You know, does this de-incentivize people who may come in for the night to go to the theater, or maybe here in the Upper West Side? You know, does it stop people from coming in to the city in general? Again, as a whole, how does that affect the revenue of the city itself? Again, if they come through the GW, they really wouldn't have to. But what if it's somebody who wants to come through the Lincoln Tunnel and drive to the Upper West Side to go to Lincoln Center? They would hit congestion pricing. So I think, you know, those conversations are concerns and ones that we would want fleshed out. And then I think a third one is, how does that affect people on the Upper West Side? Is there going to be a carve out for people that live in Manhattan? We know, apparently it seems that it's carved out that if you ride along the West Side Highway, that you'll be exempt. But what if that's not the case? Or what if you need to go in? I'll give you an example. My son went to school on 47th Street and 10th. If I had taken a car to go down there, I'd be paying a sizable congestion price each day. So those are just a couple of the examples. I think that people, you know, whether concern might not be the right word now. Other people may say curious how this is going to play out. Then it becomes a concern. But I think those are the questions that people certainly want to understand is happening. Maybe those are 3 or 4 examples.
Okay. Yeah, we've shared some of those concerns, as well as a general one of asking for Manhattan residents, for instance, to be on the traffic review mobility board or traffic mobility review board, whichever way the words go. Craig, did you have any questions? I see Michelle has her hand up. Before we go to Michelle, and we could, I guess, I assume everyone's read the resolution, so we could take that down for now, I think.
I don't have any questions. I find it striking how similar, I think, the concerns or potential concerns that were raised, and the flip side of that, the benefits that people seem to be enthusiastic about are the same ones that we have here, and it seems like the same divides that exist in our community board exist on the West Side as well. I guess that's not a surprise, but it's interesting to hear that verbalized.
Well, comforting or not, you know, I think it's similar, and I think we're overwhelmingly want the MTA to be supported. We overwhelmingly, and if you look at our resolution, we actually specifically tried to tie and say money needs to go to the MTA because we were worried that they'd start moving the money around. So this is really, we support the, you know, if I said it differently, I'd say we support congestion pricing to support the MTA. That's our view of it, and I think it may be a subtle detail, but that is what we did, what we put in there. But I mean, I think I find it comforting as well as that not that I share that we have these concerns, but it's good that we're both looking at these under the same lens. And again, I think we overwhelmingly want to support the MTA. We overwhelmingly want to make sure it's funded we overwhelmingly want people to move around, whether you live on the Upper West Side or not, using public transportation first, but we still have these then questions.
Well, yes, one of the questions raised with respect to funds going to the MTA is to have a lockbox, for instance, so that they are driven directly there. But I see that a number of people have been raising their hands. So Stephen, I think the questions are probably, or comments may well be directed to you. So let's go to Alexander Ross from the public first. And thank you very much for being in the hot seat here. Okay, Alexander,
No
go.
problem.
Yeah, hi. I just had kind of two questions about the comments that were being brought up and pretty much in general. In terms of the concern that was brought up about parking, I think a question that has come up in my area has been specifically around the garages and something, you know, in the concern that the garages are going to bump up their prices, you know, astronomically. They're already high, you know, right near the border, right, you know, just above 60th Street. So I wanted to know if that was something that was being called out in particular. And then the other thing I was wondering if it was being called out in particular is the ability to get onto the Queensboro Bridge from uptown, and whether or not that is going to qualify as entering the business zone, since to get onto the bridge, you have to get to either 59th Street or 57th Street, and technically that's below 60th. So I'm interested in whether or not that's being brought up or addressed, or yeah.
That has been brought up. I'm sorry, am I interrupting someone? And it looks like the zone, if I can quote Craig, is on the northern side of 60th Street. So going on to
inclusive of 60th Street is the term that is the phrase that is used.
Thank you. So it looks like going onto the bridge will lead to a toll, which is why people have raised the possibility, maybe a better alternative of just tolling the Queensboro Bridge. You could get off it without having to pay by going directly on the FDR Drive, or because 63rd Street is outside of the zone's border, but going back onto the bridge, we're going to be stuck, it looks like. And also, Stephen, one of the questions raised is whether there should be an exemption. New Jersey wants it for people using Port Authority tunnels and bridges as having paid once, but their money goes to the Port Authority, not to the MTA. And then they would be exempted from tolls, which would go to the MTA. And that might mean that people coming from New Jersey, although clearly not all of Lincoln Center and that theater up on Broadway and 76th Street, they're not all coming from New Jersey, and that would affect, I guess, anything for anywhere in the city. That idea of an exemption is something that's there.
Yeah, and it's the Beacon,
Right.
just as a name, but I wasn't sure if Alexander wanted me to answer those questions as
Oh, I'm
well.
sorry.
I'm following your lead, so I wasn't sure if these were general for everyone else or for me, because
That would be great. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Me too.
Well, to be candid, you know, we're need-based, so we haven't thought a lot about the Queensboro Bridge because it's not necessarily adjacent to our area. So I think long-term, that's something. I think we've talked much more about the GW Bridge, but I would say that, you know, we think about in terms of GW Bridge and what does that mean. But I do think that we've talked about garages. It's an interesting about, I don't think we've talked as much about the prices going up. Our biggest concern is that there has been a massive loss in garages in general on the Upper West Side. So, and I mean, it's a drastic amount. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the amount of space of garages have gone with new construction. It's almost that, you know, they have found it to be not profitable or a better use of space for other things. But we have talked about how this will all be exacerbated by the fact that we are losing so much parking space in what's existing. I guess we haven't thought about, that's good. That's why you go on these calls, right? So I don't think we've really started thinking about if the prices are going to go up and what that'll affect. I think the overall concern is that we don't have enough parking spaces, we think, to already fit the demand, and prices are pretty high as well. So the fact that it'll go up, I think, is just another thing to discuss. But we've had a lot of conversations in general that there's just not a lot of parking in general for people to get off the streets.
just for a second, on the east side, garages are limited by a zoning regulation that won't allow new garages to be built with new construction. Is that something that you have on the west side, or is it just developers' quest for profits, I suppose?
That's a good question for my land use team. I'm not aware. My answer is I have to double check. I have not heard that that's an issue, or nor if that's a challenge. I've just heard that it is much that the garages have gone away because they've used it because it's much more beneficial for other things. But I could follow up on that. Now you've actually perked my own interest if that's the case. But I don't know the answer to that.
I think that's a zoning requirement. It's either below 96th Street on the east side, and I don't know if it's 96 and 110 on the west side of Wall of Manhattan, but I'm pretty sure it's not just exclusive to the east side over here. I'm going to confirm that now.
Okay, let's go to Judy Schneider, then Michelle, and then Elaine. Judy? You're unmuted.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, to pick up what Alexander started with, the 59th Street Bridge, that's really important to the people who live in the 60s on the east side. So are the garages and parking and all of these other issues. But if they're going to keep the dividing line where it is now on 60th Street, and they don't toll all the exits and entrances to the bridge, we're going to have a terrible traffic problem here on 63rd Street. And not only will we have a problem here, there will be a terrible problem in Queens with backup of traffic getting to that 63rd Street off ramp from the bridge. Now, I've been speaking with people at City DOT who've been talking to MTA and the state, and they say they have the city has brought this up to them, that yes, it is a terrible problem. And I think it's really incumbent on the board. I know I can't make a resolution, but I think it's incumbent on the board. It's not listed in your list of things for today's meeting, to make a resolution that we have the entire bridge tolled, because otherwise it's just traffic is a nightmare here on the 60s. This is only going to add to it.
I'm pretty sure it is listed in there, or some language. It may not say the Queensboro Bridge, but that it effectively results in the same thing.
Well, I didn't see the words Queensboro Bridge, and I'm asking for a resolution specifically on the bridge and the entrances and exits, because it's going to be a real nightmare here on the east side if it weren't bad enough.
Yeah, tolling all entrances, exits of the Queensboro Bridge. It's on the list.
Okay, I guess I missed it. I did not see it, but I've been told today that the city is the DOT is having a problem with this in discussions. So I hope that one of your fellow board members will make a resolution to particularly take this item and pass it, that this is the action Community Board 8 would like to see, since the bridge is in our district and also Board 6, but we're not Board 6.
Thank you, Judy. And I think we've definitely talked about this. And I know that, at least from my personal standpoint, I agree wholeheartedly with your comments. It will be a nightmare if that is not the case. And we've talked plenty about how if some access or egress points are tolled and others aren't, then people are obviously going to flock to the places that aren't. So we need to avoid that.
So could we pass some kind of a resolution later on and at the end of discussion? Yeah. And maybe send that on to the city and the MTA and the state, so they know that the board feels strongly on that?
I think I can't speak for what the committee may do, but as you suggested, if someone wants to put forward that resolution, I think we would definitely entertain it and quite possibly be able to pass it.
Thank you.
It could, because Stephen does have a limited amount of time, if the other questions could be directed towards him. CB7
Yeah.
is on the west side and runs from 59th Street up to about 110th from the park over to the river. Okay, let's go one more public member of the public, then we'll get to you, Michelle. If we could unmute Ora Mazarsky, Ora.
Good evening. Thank you. I don't have a specific question. I have a more holistic question. I looked at the checklist for.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'd like just to have these focused on Stephen and CB7 and see what areas that we share. So can we come back to you a little later?
No, I mean, my question has to do with CB7.
Okay.
as
Okay,
well.
go ahead then.
The whole idea of congestion pricing on the northern part of Manhattan and CB7 and CB8, because I think the concerns are fairly similar. My question is, I looked at the list of concerns that we're discussing and thinking about and struggling with, and there's 15 items. It seems to me that if you're going to create a plan, all these things should be thought out, answered before we even think about implementing a plan. Because any projects that I've ever been involved with, if you're going to have an actionable project, you need to answer all the concerns before you proceed and say, well, we're going to put a patch over here and put a patch over here. So I just heard about, what if you want to get to the beacon from the Lincoln Tunnel? You're paying a toll to enter, and then you're going to have to pay to go to the beacon where there's no parking anyway. But so my concern is this entire concept of congestion pricing in Manhattan, in this area north of 60th Street. There's so many things to consider. What do you do about disabled people? What do you do about private ambulances transport people to hospitals? There's a whole list of things. So my question is, before we proceed, shouldn't we take a step back and say, let's figure out all these questions before we think about implementing? In the same concern, we've got so much money from the federal government now. And
can we actually, we hear your question. Can we come back to that? Because again, I don't think this is a CB7 question. We want to make sure.
But that's my concern.
Well, we'll definitely come back to that. I promise.
Thank you. There's someone from 914 ending in 738. Are you a member of CB8 or CB7, or are you here from the public? Well, we can come. You're unmuted if you'd like to say where. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. It's Evelyn David. Yes. Am I allowed to talk, or do you want me to do this later?
No, you can talk if it relates to CB7. Otherwise, if you can hold on until later.
Oh no, this is CB8 question.
Okay,
it's directly the bridge and
Okay.
no. Yes. Okay.
Then
Right.
let's
Okay. I'll wait. I'll wait. Yeah. I'll wait. I'll wait. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle, you've been very patient, and so is everyone else. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for being here. I appreciate it. Aura always speaks eloquently and gets right to the point and right to the heart of the matter. Can you put the CB7 resolution up again? Is that easy to do?
Yeah.
Zachary, if
Yeah,
not,
sure.
let me. Yeah, you can do it. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. The reason it's important that we look at it is just to notice how short it is. And basically, Stephen, what you at CB7 approved is the concept of congestion pricing. That's what we approved at CB8. I took great exception to that because I don't like to approve concepts and going to what Aura said. We approved concept and none of our questions were answered. And in this particular program, the devil is in the details. So because you approved a concept only, which is what we did at CB8, I think both community boards have every right to go back and come up with the specifics, either a spreadsheet of the advisory specifics that we would like, of those things that we are suggesting that we want them to take into consideration while they are working on their final plan, and that can then be turned into, or at least provide commentary for when they do come up with a final plan, to actually examine how much of what we asked for was genuinely considered. The concept is absolutely meaningless. Alita actually has an article she forwarded to me. It was curious. Apparently, for the MTA to have an optimal revenue stream, one of the suggested optimal charges to go into the zone would really be very good at around $80. Now, I don't know if that's anything anybody on this call wants to see. It's nothing I want to see. We're thinking around $13, $14, $15, and there's every indication that that does not help the MTA meet its goals. So there is a very, very broad space of called concept here, and that is not filled with any details that we could really rationally talk about and actually have a vote on approving or not approving. I, for one, would not want to see a resolution tonight, because to me, anything that happens to the 59th Street Bridge or anything else in this area should be based upon the whole plan, not just to take out a piece of it and vote on a piece of it, and then we don't know the consequence of something else that may be included, what that will have on that. So I think it's way premature to pull out pieces of this. And I'm interested to hear Stephen's just discuss with us how he and CB7 plan to be a part of the process, flesh out the details as the resolution says, and what process will you take to formulate the number of things that you would like to be considered as input to the final look of this plan? Because from this, as with CB8, I don't think we can be constrained by anything that looks like this kind of a resolution that we did in the past. I know we have sort of an unwritten rule that we don't go back and re-vote on the same thing over and over again, which is a wise thing, but this is not the same thing when you approved a concept with no detail. So I wonder if Stephen could just talk a little bit about all that, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I can speak to some of it, and I'll give you my thoughts, and that
Whatever, that's fine.
No, I'm a bit of a bantering New Yorker, so don't take it personal. So
No.
So the background here, I think, that drives it is this original. Some of our resolutions are simple and straightforward. Some of them are detailed. I think this one has to do with the date and time, and that is, this was put out in 2018 when, whether you realize it or not, there was no guarantee that there was going to be congestion pricing. And quite frankly, it was the opposite. Congestion pricing had not been voted on. So this was, the context of this was to vote and sort of saying, we want to support congestion pricing. And for us to say, it was no guarantee. It was very much for us just to let our electeds in the area know that as a whole, CB7 was a supportive. There were some votes coming up, and we wanted to let our elected know where our position was. We put a lot of caveats in there because that's what we do if we do direction. We want to be part of it. It has to be for the MTA, and that's why it's worded in that manner. So that's step one. The next step is, as you say, with the details. And one of the things we're trying to decide, and we do this a lot in other spaces, is, do we flesh out a demands of 15 or 20 things now and hand it over? Or do we wait till they kind of start their first round of thoughts and comment on that? So we have not decided on that. Sometimes, I just had a conversation with someone today, and literally the conversation was not if we're going to comment on the next step, it's just when. So again, sometimes we have spent time putting up, here's our thoughts on these things before a vote goes forward, and sometimes it's after. And I'm not sure where we're going to come out on this. I think some people want us to do one way and some people want us to do the other. So I don't have an answer other than to let you know why it was so simple in the beginning, and then what we're sort of looking at. And part of me coming here is I was interested in your conversations, because there's more of that question on what to do. You know, and I will be honest with you, there is a certain group of people that feel like they're going to do what they're going to do anyway, but that's not why we decide to do things. But there's always people that sort of feel like, you know, we get frustrated that we don't have the input that we probably want, and there's a concern about this because of how it's coming together. But that's kind of my summary for you, is that's why it was simple in its nature, and we're trying to decide about a next step.
From our point of view, Stephen, from Craig's and my point of view, we wanted to be proactive.
I think that was probably our rationale as well, but
Michelle, you're going in and out and you look frozen. Maybe it's my whole
exactly.
computer.
That was the point I was going to. Oh, am I? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I better now? I have no indication on my end. Okay, because I think to be, anyway, the point is, I think, Stephen, we had the same feeling, which is why our resolution looks like it does. But I do think in general with government or as anything else, it's a very good idea to get ahead of it, because those comments can guide as well as be commentary after the fact. So if you want to have input, I think the best time to have input is while the process is beginning, you know, when you're starting out, when they've invested a number of hours in this and have come up with what they think is their work product, and then you come in and you try to chop it up, it's much more difficult to have influence at that time. But in our case, and I think it would work for, you know, all boards to have commentary, a work product in advance that suggests the path forward to be used as a guide for the MTA, for the congestion pricing committees, and then to ask that what they don't come back with, when they don't adhere to what we're requesting or inquiring about, we'll have only those things to question. But I think if you don't give them something where they have an indication how the public feels at the outset, I think it's way more difficult to get a result that you would be looking for. So I would hope our board does that. We come up with a work product of suggestion and parameters. We take things into consideration that make sense. And then what they come up with, at least they've had our input to start, and then we can always comment on it further. I wanted to just, because I think this may be a question out there.
Michelle, Stephen's going to have to leave, and we have a few other people who've also had their hands raised. If you don't mind,
that's fine. Alita,
we'll come back.
whenever you want to address why we don't have the garages. There was a question about it. I was going to clarify it. So let Stephen know. And
okay.
Everybody else.
I could take one more, and then it texted me that the section that I need to be on. So if there's something for me,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's go to Elaine then. And Elaine, if you could keep your question short, maybe we could actually get to the public person.
Lots of other things I could say, but to Stephen, not sure if you're saying it, but in CB8, the institutions, the hospitals have already been negotiating with the garages to control the garage space so that people not affiliated with those institutions are not going to get into those garages. And there's discussion that even people who are currently in the garages may no longer have their lease exempt renewed. So that's a serious problem for us here. The whole issue of no garages south of 96th was passed, that new development could not have it. However, they can come in and ask for a variance, and we have given it, particularly to the institutions who have a lot of garage space to begin with. But wherever those institutions are, and they're not just in CB 7 and 8, they're even higher up because they're controlling lots of property. So I think it'd be interesting to know what's going on in your community, whether St. Luke's or Mount Sinai or any of the facilities there or the schools are doing the same thing that we see here in our community. So I'd be interested. The other quickie, since you touched on the MTA and the Port Authority funding, I am opposed to any waivers for people who do not live in the city. They don't pay taxes as it is. So I don't see why we would do any waivers for them. They use our services and contribute nothing. And if that impacts other things, well, that has to be figured out. Okay, I have other things, but that's, Stephen, the issue on the garages for us.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And I think feedback is, it's interesting. So that's why you come here, you learn some things. So that's been helpful. I think our perception has been that garages are already so expensive that people that are parking on the street, I think it's more, the concern more is that we have a large group of people that park on the street who we don't believe can afford to park in a garage. So now those people are going to have less spots. And we have already lost a lot of parking spots.
We have
to bike lanes and green. And we've done that. We're okay with that, but it's sort of, you're managing both of them, right? But we put in a lot of bike lanes. We're doing a lot of loading zones. That has been something we've supported, but we're reticent of what it's causing. So this could just exacerbate. Now you're going to have less spots. Now, even if if you're now saying, and I guess I did not realize that, if they're going to be bumping people out, we're just concerned that the existing parking is not even enough. So those are just more conversations. But we've been thinking it more of our concern for, there is not a large, but I think about 20% of the population in the city, they say in general, and I think probably up here, has cars. What's going to happen to them is if every morning they come in and somebody parked to go downtown. So we're concerned about that as well.
Stephen, just to clarify one last thing quickly. On the west side, it's below 110th Street, as I suspected that new buildings don't allow for parking. That was a law passed in 1982.
Well, when I became chair of ORCAM, I came through another committee, so I've been educating myself on land use for the last year and a half, and I continue to educate myself. But maybe that's a conversation for us to have.
Let me just say that
they're going to be between 110 and 57th, and nowhere garages. There's going to be a need for garages if things happen the way they happen. So I'm just talking off the top of my head.
The other community boards that need to be brought in, or I think it's CB12 in Washington Heights, because they're going to have the same problem with people coming over the bridge and taking the spaces up there, which they already do. And also in CB11, when they're coming off the Willis Avenue, they're going to try to park up there. So it's just not us on the border, but it's wherever we have a community board that includes the entrance or exit to a roadway or a bridge that enters Manhattan. So we may want to try to organize with.
We did.
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Well,
That's
Lita
okay.
and Craig, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Sorry I got to leave a little bit early. We're trying to always juggle our times, right?
Thank you. One thing before you run is that we've been talking about the necessity of a residential parking permit, but that doesn't work for people who drive up to our areas because they can't afford or can't get to public transportation if they're working here, which just occurred to me. So I hope that you'll be able to come back and participate in more conversations, or send your transportation chair, or all of you join us. But I think because we share so many interests and concerns, that this is really useful to hear from you and from other boards about what matters. And last is that one of the reasons we're trying to be so proactive is because Cuomo was going to have the Transit Mobility Review Board operate behind closed doors, no Manhattan representatives, and that just spelled bad news. So
we've heard the same thing, and that's another concern.
Yeah.
But I agree in terms of our coordination. I thank you so much for having me, and I'd be happy to come back and/or make sure the Community Board 7 communicates with you. And I appreciate you guys taking the initiative.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Okay, before we get back on track with all our discussion about the various exemptions, discounts, other issues, why don't we hear if there have been any updates? I tried to find any. So Craig, over to you.
So there isn't much in the way of updates. The only things that I found looking for updates were two articles, one of which mentioned, and I think we probably knew this already, that the MTA announced that the project's environmental assessment is expected to be released sometime this spring. At that point, The agency will launch into a new public comment period, hosting additional public hearings that will give residents the opportunity to comment on the document itself. These additional public hearings are expected to begin in the late spring or early summer. And until then, the MTA is encouraging New Yorkers to continue providing feedback during the project's early outreach period, which will run through April 27th. So that isn't really news, but that's just where we stand currently. And then just a few details in terms of the transparency issue. There's an article in, I believe it was the Gotham Gazette, where they talked about how the environmental assessment will include a large amount of transportation modeling and analysis with 14 different scenarios or model runs. These will show how different pricing structures, time of day pricing, and discounts, tolls, exemptions, credits, et cetera, will affect the traffic in the region and the effectiveness of the program, including how much money would be generated to fund the MTA capital program in those scenarios. So one of the points of this article was that open data on congestion pricing will help the public be able to have easy access to the information, be able to understand what the different options are in terms of the policies that would be implemented and what the likely impacts of such scenarios would be. So again, this comes back to the question of transparency, and if we are going to be asking for the Traffic Mobility Review Board to hold its meetings in public, if we want to do something further with transparency, we may want to consider asking that that any details regarding model runs for the environmental done as part of the environmental assessment will also be made public. I don't know that we care that much if it's too technical, but I just thought I'd raise that.
I think the more public information, the better. So maybe before the end of this meeting, someone might want to make a resolution on that point. Anything I think relating to the procedures of implementing this in terms of rulemaking or how the Transit Mobility Review Board functions is not is worth hammering home and making our point strongly, because that has to do with fairness and it has to do with the public's trust in this. I am still concerned about implementing rules before we know the fallout of the coronavirus and the impact on businesses and traffic and transit. My understanding is that parking lots in Westchester are filling up again and people are taking public transportation, but I don't know. I also hear that the trains are relatively still kind of empty. Well, let's go back.
They are, as someone who takes the trains on a regular basis, they're still nowhere close to what they were like before, both commuter rail and New York City Transit. In fact, I think I read today that New York City subways currently are at 59% of pre-pandemic levels, and New York City buses are at 64% of pre-pandemic levels. And the commuter rails are slightly below that.
Right. So if we don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to change, I mean, a lot of law firms, for instance, are having people come in 3 days a week and businesses. So
yeah. On the flip side, though, I will add that there is an opportunity for transit right now to recover faster than I guess people are anticipating now, because with the current gas price surge, it will drive people to transit. We've seen evidence of that over the years, that there is some elasticity of demand that results from gas price spikes, and we're probably going to see that to some degree now, and it may really drive some people who had been driving to perhaps reconsider their modes of commuting.
right,
I also just want to go on.
I was just going to say, just as it's not really an aside, but safety on the trains has something to do with whether people are taking them or not. And there's been a lot of bad news lately, so I don't know if that's impacting people.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, just because there's a lot that was mentioned in the discussion before, just for anyone who is relatively new or new to this task force, and if this is their first meeting, just to give an update as to where we are right now as a task force and a community board. We have not actually taken a formal position on this congestion pricing plan. The board last took any formal action on congestion pricing as a whole in 2014. And again, as Michelle alluded to, that was more conceptual in nature based off of a past concept. However, last year, there was a resolution that came out of this task force asking for the congestion pricing law that we are currently discussing to be repealed. And that was voted down by the full board. I believe it was 28 opposed, 17 in favor, and 1 abstention. So as we've mentioned many times, the purpose of this task force isn't to litigate the validity or the sentiments about the law itself. It's to try to get ahead of any policies that are going to be made and really to be able to hopefully influence the Traffic Mobility Review Board as they make their policy decisions, hopefully in full view of the public, and also for any city or state agencies that are involved in the process to know what we're hoping occurs, so that we're not surprised by any of the proposed implementation plans, whether it be things from a design perspective to the Queensboro Bridge debate, which is one of those facts that we should know the answer to. And you would think, based on the language of the law, that it's pretty cut and dry that inclusive of 60th Street means the 59th Street Bridge. But because there is no one who has ever been able to definitively make that statement, it may be something that we want to try to get ahead of and make the point that we need to deal with that before before a policy is proposed that would perhaps cause chaos here.
Do we want to, a couple of people have their hands raised, but do we want to talk about procedures of the Traffic Mobility Review Board before we talk about substance relating to the issues of congestion pricing, such as tolling and fees and exemptions and discounts and that kind of thing, just so that if they're starting to meet, we're already in front of them on how they're going to meet, or what information the public is going to hear about, or how they're going to conduct, or whether they'll conduct hearings. In other words, just the matter of how they come to their rules.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I don't know though, it's in anyone's interest to have an extended discussion about this at the expense of all the other issues that we were possibly going to touch upon tonight. I do think that it would be a pretty obvious and purposeful action if we were to request that all Traffic Mobility Review Board meetings be held in a public forum in accordance with open meeting laws, which is, I think, Alita, what you were suggesting that we do. And I think that could be the starting point for the discussion, that's what the two of us were talking about, that we think makes sense in order to at least put this issue on out in a formal way.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? I don't want to preempt you, and I think this is your idea, so I don't want to take credit for it.
You've already said it, and thank you. Yes, that's right. To conform to the open meetings law and have everything be in public. It's significant for the people in the city. It's significant for commuters. Enough said on why they should conform, and it's a government entity, why it should conform to the open meetings law. Okay, so then why don't we? Barry's had his hand raised. Why don't we go to Barry and see what we need to deal with by the end of the meeting? Barry.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting so far. I'd like to put a resolution on the floor. If it's seconded, speak to it, please. The resolution is we strongly urge the Traffic Mobility Review Board to conduct their meetings in accordance with the open meeting law, and further resolve that the Traffic Mobility Review Board include in their recommendation that all exits and entrances to the Queensboro Bridge be tolled. And if there's a second of that, I'll be happy to speak to it. You can second by raising your hand, the virtual hand at the bottom of your screen.
Right.
Well,
Although
I mean, I'll raise my hand. I can also.
you do count. I, on the other hand, would like to see them separated because the Queensboro Bridge tolling is part of the substance of the matters, and it requires, I think, more discussion, more analysis, and should be included with other recommendations that we make, even if it's just around the 59th Street Bridge.
Fine.
So
I would agree.
I recommend splitting them as you suggest. Let's vote on the first one, and then we can vote on the second one. The first one being that they conduct their meetings according to the open meeting law.
okay, do we have a second on that?
I see Sharon clapping. Yes, clapping her
Okay.
hands and raising her thumb.
Okay, so then let's just go through and make sure we have all the community board members. I'll write them down so that we have the list. I have
Yeah.
Barry.
We haven't called the question
Oh,
yet.
right.
Let's
Okay,
make
I'll
sure
write
there's
them
no
down while you do that
discussion.
then.
I
Go
already
ahead.
have it down.
Oh, you do?
Oh,
Okay, well
yes.
then I'll stop.
So
Okay,
don't.
I call the question for the record.
okay, okay, thank you. A second?
Yeah.
You see
Again, I
anyone?
see Sharon's finger up,
Okay.
and this is only for community board members to vote on.
Whether or not you're a member of the committee,
Right.
Correct.
task force. Okay,
So
all right, so then,
right now, the full list of attendees currently that I see are myself, Alita, Barry, Kaz, Elaine, John, Lori, Michelle, and Sharon. If I missed any board members, please raise your hand and let me know.
okay, so Barry, Zachary, could you lower Barry's hand, please? If you are voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause on the resolution suggested by Barry that we're voting on, please raise your hand. Otherwise, it will be considered a yes in support of the resolution. Give you another few seconds. Not seeing any hands raised, and I would say it's unanimous in support of the resolution complying with the open meetings rule. Thank you, Barry. And thank you, everyone. Okay. Michelle, you have your hand raised. Lori, I saw yours for a split
Yeah.
second. Was that a mistake?
I'm unmuted?
Yes,
Can I say?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
you had your
Sure.
hand raised for a split second. Now I think it's a mistake.
Yeah, no, I was not raising my hand.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Lori. Okay, Michelle, floor
Yeah.
is yours.
So I think the resolution we just passed was fine. I think the second resolution that was on the floor should still be under discussion. I appreciate Mr. Schneider's support of Mrs. Schneider, but the fact still remains that this is very premature and it is no different a suggestion than any other suggestion would be in our list of suggestions that I imagine we will eventually formulate, to send in our concerns. I don't see any reason for this to be singled out. So I would propose that we don't call the question on this resolution because I don't see any benefit to it. It's not going to be enacted any earlier than any other thing that they're going to put into place, any other of the rules. So there's no particular advantage to sliding this in prematurely. There's no benefit to it. I think we ought to, and I don't think it's right to consider it without considering the comprehensive plan, because we keep talking about the devil is in the details. So I don't see why we would want to push something forward without considering all of the other details. And I'm hoping that that maybe even in this meeting that we can come up with a whole list of things, to vote on that we want to be part of the plan that can go to the full board for a vote. Because did I hear the date April? Did I hear April being a deadline, or did I mishear that?
April 27th is the deadline for this first round of
Right. Okay.
public input, and then the environmental assessment will be released, and then there's going to be a second round of public hearings and meetings and other additional opportunities to weigh in. And
Right.
I would assume that no policy is going to be determined until after the environmental assessment is released and people have a chance to review it and understand what the findings are, especially of the models, of the model inputs that are going to allow us to really see what the projected impacts of different types of policies and toll structures, or toll rates, I should say, not to confuse it with physical structures, but toll rates and discounts, credits, and exemptions, et cetera, will result in.
Thank you, Craig, because that's exactly the crux of it. I appreciate that really good clarification. And the fact that we are asking for an open process, they are telling us that this is this is their public hearing process going on right now. So why wouldn't we organize, get a list together and work on that, submit that for this process, listen to what they come back with, to their evaluation, to their EIS, and then we can finalize. But to jump in prematurely with one particular thing as though it were more important than any other piece of this puzzle, I don't think makes any sense. So I'm looking forward to us maybe starting to formulate such a list at this meeting tonight. I think that would be very productive.
Okay,
Thanks very much.
Craig, Barry has a point of personal privilege, so let's go to Barry before we go to anyone else.
Okay.
Go, Barry.
Thank you very much, Alita. And just one thing, civility. Michelle, there was no point in your introduction to your remarks regarding the vote we just took, or the vote we would like to take now. Thank you very much. Let's be civil when we discuss these issues that are of great importance to the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you. It certainly, congestion pricing is a topic fraught with personal opinions as well as economic considerations. It can lead to high emotional involvement, but I appreciate the call for a decorum and the thoughtful analysis that everyone seems to be bringing to this. So appreciate that, and the efforts to try and get something cohesive together. Before we go to Andrew Fine from the public, or should I say Abigail Fine's dad, then I'm wondering, Craig, why don't we ask, I know you and I didn't discuss this, but because you are an organized thinker and have potential recommendations regarding potential policies as a first topic, why don't we explore those, and then we could move on if we have time to the discounts, offsets, and exemptions. Does that make sense?
Sure. I just thinking out loud, I separated the two more just from the standpoint of organization. Some of those that were listed in that second category, such as the Queensboro Bridge, may have been more appropriate in that top category. So let me just walk through them quickly, and we can then decipher which should be where and what they actually mean. So these are all things that we've discussed at least at some point on this task force, whether they be in detail or just in passing, that people just want to have ideas that they want to perhaps look at in more detail. So under the category of potential recommendations regarding potential policies, we talked about providing municipal parking in outer boroughs near subway stations, establishing a residential parking permit program in neighborhoods outside the congestion zone, although that could also apply inside the congestion zone as well. Accommodations for small businesses that will face financial strains as a result of congestion pricing or being near the border. Accommodations for nonprofits. Revisiting policies regarding taxis and the consideration of eliminating all congestion fees for yellow cabs. And by that, we are thinking not just the fee for those below 96th Street, but the fee in general. And recommending hours in which tolls are in effect and timeframes and discounts for peak versus off-peak. And part of the reason why I think it gets a little hazy here is because the Traffic Mobility Review Board will be establishing things regarding tolls, and some of some of these items can fall in both categories. So moving on to the next one, potential recommendations regarding discounts, offsets, and exemptions. I'll just start with the Queensboro Bridge because that some could argue would be considered an exemption, or in the case of Barry's proposal, a requirement as opposed to an exemption. And that you can argue would also just be a policy, since it wouldn't be a discount or exemption or such. Also, I guess in this category, it would, well, I guess everything else is truly more in that discount, offset, exemption category. So we're talking about potential exemptions or discounts for motorcycles, for vehicles carrying more than a defined number of passengers, or high occupancy vehicles. Offsets for those who pay tolls on non-MTA crossings, such as Port Authority crossings and the Tappan Zee Bridge. Discounts for residents living outside the congestion zone, but who garage their vehicles within the congestion zone. For people performing medical related trips, though there have been questions raised as to how you can actually monitor those in a way where you don't have privacy issues at hand. Discounts for vehicles crossing into the zone for a very short time, such as to accommodate alternate side parking activities, or construction forces a vehicle to cross into a congestion zone, or even if you had a grace period where if you go in and out within a certain a lot of time, such as you have parking garages that will say the first 15 minutes is free. I'm not saying 15 minutes would be the amount, but perhaps maybe that's something to allow those who mistakenly go into the zone or are forced in to not have to be assessed the fee. Broadening medical exemptions beyond the language in the congestion pricing law, which exempts only authorized vehicles transporting persons with disabilities. And then on the flip side, providing no exemptions beyond those stipulated currently in the congestion pricing law. So that's as far as I know, the full universe of things that we've talked about thus far. And there's a lot there, and I don't expect that we'll be able to get through and debate every single one tonight at all. I think this is just building up to a point where we're going to eventually have a package. But at least this is a kickoff point for being able to try to hone this down a little, I think. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I think organizing and categorizing is helpful. We could also think about whether we want to have all of these worked on with potential resolutions or opinions and comments, or whether we want to do them in sections, meeting just once a month. I do like to be ahead of what they're doing. That's something that we could kind of sort out. Let's hear what people have to say about this. Does it make sense, Craig, to talk in terms of one of those two bundles, and then we can move to the other one when people are finished with their comments, just so to try and keep it a little bit structured?
We can do that. We can start with the first one. I would request, because, and I'm not saying this as just because of any personal opinions that I have, but I really do think that the Queensboro Bridge discussion is more of a policy issue rather than a discount credit exemption item, and should be discussed within that first batch of things.
That's fine. So then let's move it up there. And I'm thinking that definitions for peak versus off-peak and hours is more of a discount thing than a potential policy maybe. And it makes sense to talk about those kinds of, I mean, anything that's off-peak, I guess, is always considered a discount off a peak fare.
Yeah, I would think that's more, that would go into that top category in a way.
Well,
because
that's where you have it. But I was thinking that maybe it made sense when we're talking about specifics or if we're talking about discounts for certain things, that's part of it. It involves some policy decisions. But why don't we start gathering some comments and see where the conversation goes, and we could put up some I don't know, cones if we need to.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go to Andrew.
Hello, folks. Thank you for taking my comments, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. In regards to this ill-conceived regressive tax that is ableist, ageist, classist, and discriminatory to people of color, and will lead to a traffic nightmare in order to fund an MTA that just received $8 billion and is woefully horrific at budget management. In our current situation with the COVID and our lagging economy with double unemployment as compared to the rest of the nation, Mayor Adams wants workers and tourists to return to Midtown. And I think there's no better incentive for workers and tourists to come back to Midtown than to charge workers hundreds of dollars a month to simply drive into Midtown, and charge tourists $30 a clip to drive into Midtown to go see a Broadway show. That being said, let's keep it simple. I have a couple of suggestions, and I think it's much better if we simplify things than complicate things. Everybody talks about exemptions and little bits and pieces and doormen and all sorts of little pieces. But what I would suggest is simply, one, have all Manhattanites should be exempt from congestion pricing. Because there's no reason that we should pay $30 to drive a mile from our homes, or $30 just simply to get back to our homes if we happen to live south of 59th Street. Second, I think that all side street parking spots should be limited simply to New York plates. Real simple. Anybody that lives in New York State, you get to park on a side street. If you don't live in New York State, tough luck. Finally, no out-of-state exemptions for people that are crossing the George Washington Bridge. This kills the whole purpose. If you're going to paying $16 or $18 or $20 to cross the George Washington Bridge, you shouldn't get exempted from crossing 59th Street. You should just pay like everybody else. Anyway, I'd like to keep it simple. I think it's an atrocious and idiotic idea. I'm really surprised that it ever passed the state legislature. Plenty of car haters out there, so I understand that much. But let's keep it simple. Let's keep Manhattanites out of the fray. Don't penalize us taxpayers. They pay more taxes than anybody in New York State. But meanwhile, we're going to get penalized just for simply exercising our freedom of movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess that's Evelyn David, the 914 ending in 738 number. Is that right? Could you just identify yourself for our tape, please?
Yes. Hi, good evening. The number one, thank you for putting the municipal parking lots on the list. That's a killing two birds with one stone type of idea. You park your car in a municipal parking lot. It generates money for the city. You hop on the subway. You give more money to the MTA. Everything is, making life better. So that was one thing. Very quickly, that's on the list. The idea. So I want to say one thing. Can I say one thing about the Queensboro Bridge idea of tolling entrances and exits? Very fast. If that were to happen, you could put then there's no more reasoning for putting that line at 60. Then our arguments and our pleading to put the line below 60th to save parking spaces on Park Avenue, which I know there are like 10 or 12 of them, right? And everybody's talking about parking spaces. Then the idea, you can then logically and with rationale behind it, then you can move the line below 60th. In fact, you can move it below 57th Street, but if you move it below 60th, you've saved the parking places, right? So that goes with the Queensboro Bridge tolling. That's if that ever happens. The one thing I have a question about is discounts or exceptions for those into the zone due to construction. Now, see, that goes with the below 60th Street thing because there's so much construction on 60th Street. And right now, if you try to get across, never mind. It's a nightmare. It's already getting to be a mess. right? So, but how would you make an exemption for somebody that has to go below into the zone due to construction? I'm just, that's a question. How would you do that?
Well, as I
If
mentioned,
the cameras are, if the cameras are up there and you, go ahead.
as I mentioned, if there is a mechanism for timestamps to be able to determine whether someone comes in and out of the zone within a short period of time, there
Right.
would be a way to be able to say, oh, well, this person was perhaps not intentionally trying to enter the zone and would be provided a grace period. That would, I think, be the most feasible way of doing that, assuming that they're going to put up the stanchions only at the borders, because remember, those people who are driving within the zone will get told when they exit the zone. So you would have the ability to see people come in and out in a short period of time. At least that is my understanding of it.
I get it. So if you had construction on 61st Street and you couldn't make a turn on 61st to get onto Park Avenue and you had to go to 60th Street because of construction, then if you went on to 60th, you just went on 60th and then disappeared around the corner. If the lights, the one suggestion from Senator Kruger's office was put the camera on the south side of 60th Street. So you're not going past, it's still on 60th Street, make everybody happy, but you're not going below it. You're making the turn onto 60th, you're not going below it. And anyway, if they did that with the Queensboro Bridge, that would be that all the reasoning for not, then you can really open up 60th Street. And then make the line below 60th so you don't cut off the parking spaces. That's what I'm fighting for. Everything. It's going to be bad enough as it is. I think we should try to save as much as we can. I kind of stand there. Anyway, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to comment that in order for it, if we were able to make a case for the cameras being on the south side of 60th Street, then you would need the Queensboro Bridge to be told in order to open up 60th Street so that those who are coming in to Manhattan aren't using 60th Street to avoid a toll.
Right.
That was and I'm not offering an opinion here. I think that's just
no. I know. Well, if they told Queensboro Bridge coming and going, you don't have to worry whether it's 60th or 57th or whatever it is. Then the argument that, oh no, we want to catch them coming off the bridge. You already got them coming off the bridge. This goes back to a discussion. I remember years ago, they were going to toll the Queensboro Bridge $2.50 or $5, and everybody went up in arms. Oh, you can't do that. No. Now it's going to be, oh my God, $20? Well, we'll see what happens. But anyway, how things go around in circles. Okay, so the debate goes on, and I'm really hoping it goes below 60th. And I know I get all the arguments. I do get it, but the parking is, tragically, that's a big deal right now. It's just huge. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I hope that goes somewhere. My suggestions, my hopes. All right.
We're keeping track, and so that we could discuss them. But obviously, based on CB7, parking is a big deal all over the place. So thank you for making the comment. Alexander, if you don't mind, since you already spoke, if we could go to Leah and then Boaz and then come back to you, would that be okay? I can't see your face, so I don't know if you're nodding, so I'll assume it's okay. It's okay. Got 2 thumbs up. Let's go to Leah then. Leah Hanlon. Thank you. You're unmuted.
Yes. Hi. I apologize if this has been covered because I've had some connections problems tonight, but could you just explain to me, I'm not exactly sure what input this task force is giving to whom and how seriously any of it's likely to be taken, because I kind of have the impression that this all passed in Albany, and considering that Albany doesn't seem to care about major life-changing issues, like the fact that there's this pandemic and nobody's in Midtown anymore, and they're still plowing ahead with the pre-pandemic plan. I'm not exactly sure what input we're giving and how it's going to help. That's one. And the second is I kind of feel like I'm in parallel universes between this committee or this task force and the transportation committee, because in this committee, you invite people from other community boards and there's all kinds of civil discussion about residential parking permits and garages and how there's not enough parking for people like me who are broke but need a car and can't afford a garage anymore. But in the transportation committee, the mere mention of a car causes people to be spitting venom. So I guess the overarching point that links both of those questions is how much are the reasonable suggestions being made in this group really going to be taken into account by anybody in dealing with this congestion pricing situation?
We don't know, but we need to do the best that we can. Our resolutions go to government officials such as the governor, our elected officials in Albany, anyone appointed to the Transit Mobility Review Board, the MTA, Port Authority, I suppose. They go to a wide range of people. Whether or not they choose to follow anything that we're asking for is up to them. Unfortunately, we're an advisory group, and here we're giving our advice, whether or not they choose to follow it. But hopefully, if enough public opinion shares concerns such as the procedures of the Transit Mobility Review Board or some of the issues, even if there's no consensus on what parking on the side street should look like, the idea that it's been raised and needs some open discussion. And if the open discussion is actually open and to the public, that maybe there will be a chain of events that leads to notice of what we're looking for. If we just reside in the dark without expressing ourselves, without sharing our concerns with other community boards, we might as well not do this. So we don't know if they'll follow anything, but hopefully at least it may raise their ears, and that's why we want. I mean, it's one of the reasons, but it's a reason why it should all be done in public.
And if you don't mind, I just want to add on to that, and I just to take a step back. If you recall, congestion pricing was enacted into law as part of the New York State budget bill in 2019, and had some details included within that bill regarding congestion pricing, but the most important detail was that a traffic mobility review board would be formed to determine most of the policies regarding tolling. And that's exactly why we're doing the work that we are now, because we do have the ability to make recommendations and to hopefully be heard and have a voice before things are etched in stone. In terms of your comments regarding the Transportation Committee, as co-chair of that committee, I feel like I need to just speak to that for a moment.
Please, this is a genuine question, not a criticism. I'm really confused.
Well, I think there are two pieces of this. One, I think, obviously, just as we do in this task force, we have a lot of passionate debates on the Transportation Committee regarding all sorts of issues. I don't think it's a fair statement to say that any time that things that may be beneficial to drivers and cars are discussed, that it results in venom. I think there's a very mixed set of viewpoints and diverse set of viewpoints that are represented on the board. And I think as a co-chair, we are careful to take everyone's feelings and wishes into consideration. And a lot of what we do is also driven by the fact that we work very closely with New York City's Department of Transportation and New York City Transit. And when they have initiatives that they're trying to put forward and get community board input on, we are obliged to take those on. And in that sense, we're following the policies that the city is working to enact and trying to get our viewpoints as a board and as a community in the public eye as through the work that we do. But in terms of looking at whether it be residential parking permits or other things of that nature, we've never been closed-minded to talking about it. In fact, I think we did talk about residential parking permits not so long ago, where we had
We actually did. And I asked about it, and I pointed out the fact that about a quarter of the residential the parkers on the side streets have out-of-state plates. And I was universally laughed down. And again, I'm sorry, I don't want to make this personal, but you and your co-chair also laughed that down and said, well, those people are doing something illegal, then we're not going to even take this question seriously. So I don't really think
that's not true, and
Okay,
I don't
well,
think that's a fair
Craig,
statement. And I'm not looking to litigate
wait a
this,
second,
but-
please. Could you finish this offline? Because
Well, yeah, but I just want to respond to that, because this goes to the heart of the basis of the question regarding the Transportation Committee and the work that relates to what we're doing here as a task force. So for things like residential parking permits, I think my message is consistent. I'm personally not in favor of it, because I understand, just knowing a lot about it, that it creates a lot of potential headaches. I'm not saying it's not a policy that's worth considering, but the out-of-state license plate doesn't necessarily indicate that it's someone who is living out of state. It may be someone who is here visiting. It may be a worker or a home health aide. There are many reasons why you may have people out of state, and it may actually cause a lot of inconvenience for the residents and stakeholders of this community to do that. Where, think about buildings that have staffs. Many building staff members don't live in New York City, don't even necessarily live in New York State. And they would be the ones who would be hurt by that. And that would in turn potentially hurt the residents of those buildings and of this community to do that. So I'm only raising the point where we should be talking about everything. We should be really thinking about such things. But just because we have talked about how things can be, may not necessarily be the best option for various reasons, doesn't mean that we're hostile to it or we don't want to have that discussion. And I think here we're trying to have a more open-ended discussion in terms of how this is viewed in the context of congestion pricing. But when we move beyond just congestion pricing and into the Transportation Committee, things get looked at it from a different perspective and may result in different types of discussions and different outcomes. So I just want to make that point. Again, there's nothing personal about it. I just want to provide that clarification, because it is confusing. I think you raised a very good question there.
it is, again, it is not at all personal. I think you should perhaps be more cognizant of the fact that it seems very cognitively dissonant to members of the public. And it also seems a little bit more hostile and less objective oftentimes. So just that's it, I guess. I'm done. I'm losing my voice today anyway. So thank you.
We always appreciate your input, Leah. So thank you very much.
And also we want the board to be, the board, it's a community board. It's not 50 people making their own decisions. So the input of community members is critical to having the voice of the community heard, which is one of the significant functions of a community board. So if there is cognitive dissonance, if there is a concern about the interaction or roles of two committees that touch each other, then not in that sense, then we should know about it, and you should feel free to make that point in emails or in some other communication. And we appreciate it, and I appreciate it, and it sounds like Craig does as well, the input and the comments. We're not always perceptive about other reactions to what we're saying. Craig, I'm wondering if it makes any sense in terms of timing to have general kinds of input and then later on break it down specifically. So something like, if there is consensus on the idea, and I'm just drawing this out of the list that we have, that there should be different fees for peak and off-peak, that off-peak should be evenings or should be weekends, without being specific about the hours or about the pricing differential, something like that. So at least we have made a point about the concepts, the ideas, the general principles, and then we could be more specific later on. So at least we get something out there if there is consensus on various topics. That was just a suggestion.
So I guess my feeling on that is, I think I don't recall if there's any official documentation regarding peak versus off-peak versus weekend. I think conceptually it's always been perceived that there would be different rates and that prices would be variable based off of the timeframes where you'd have the most congestion, and that there are always going to be incentives to, say, encourage deliveries to take place during off-peak and overnight hours for this purpose. But I do fear that without knowing more details in terms of the models and how and what the projected impacts are of different timeframes and such, that it may be really hard to come up with something now that's going to be able to stick or really make an impact. I'm not saying that should be our action. I don't personally feel comfortable taking a position on something without that additional level of detail. I think, at least from my standpoint, it's different from, say, the Queensboro Bridge discussion, where I think there's more of a complexity to the manner in which the bridge exists and the manners in which it can impact the community. And I think the peak versus off-peak versus weekend question is a citywide issue in a sense, whereas the Queensboro Bridge is a hyper-local issue where I don't know how the models are going to, if they're going to even be looking at that specifically or not. So it's hard to say. And again, that's why sometimes it's hard to, you want to find that sweet spot as to where to take action. And I don't know where that sweet spot is. You could make the case that it's better to make statements now and make them as early as possible. But then the planner in me says, well, sometimes it's better to wait until we have more information and data to be able to make a more educated recommendation.
Well, we can talk about that offline too. I just want to say that I disagree with you about the Queensboro Bridge. I think that's a citywide issue as well. The impact of people coming off the bridge and the congestion on, I think Judy was talking about 63rd Street. Evelyn was talking about 60th Street. Other people, Rob and the East Midtown Partnership, other people were talking about moving the border line south about the bridge. And there are plenty of people who come in from Queens, from Long Island. I guess Long Island is not part of the city, but from Queens, to whom it is a citywide issue. So the impact is local, but the effect or the traffic is not just local, or maybe it's not even just local. I don't know. And then we also have, I guess it's all part of CB8, Roosevelt Island, and the impact on those guys. And it's something that we have to also figure out, is impact on Roosevelt Island. So having said that, and then I have some general questions too, but I'll save them till later. Let's go to Boaz, and then other people who've already spoken. So if you could unmute. You already did. Boaz, go.
Okay, really quick. One, I'm in favor on any solution that will reduce the number of cars in New York City. Second, the technology is out there. you are all talking about peak, off peak. For example, in Tel Aviv, they have a flexible dynamic congestion prices that is basically is changing, depends on the traffic. Another technology that is out there is that reduce regulation, meaning that right now I'm walking from work back to my house on 92nd, and I see a lot of cars, lots of SUV empty, meaning that only the driver. I think that it should be much easier for every driver to be able to pick up people like me. They are going to my direction, pick up, and become some kind of a Uber or a dynamic cab. Lots of solutions is out there, but I think that right now, I think that you guys are still on the macro discussion, that definitely there should be a discussion on reducing the cars. There is congestion, not on the road, there is congestion now even on the sidewalks. So we want to actually increase the sidewalks, give more people space to walk. It's a beautiful city. And we have a great public transportation, and we just need to enhance it with technology and with good ideas, but interesting discussion. And that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to Alexander, and then, well, we haven't heard from Evan. So if we could do that and then go back to Alexander and Evelyn. If you could unmute Evan.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Alita. Yeah, I'd just like to echo what I heard from Elaine, from Aura, and Michelle. And first, I think the goal, obviously, of congestion pricing in general, reduce pollution, reduce congestion, encourage public transportation, all great goals. But I also would echo what Andrew said, is I think it's becoming inordinately complex. Just listening to this conversation about carve-outs, about surge or different timing of different types of pricing, and the questions about what it will do to alternate side of the street parking. Right now you can on the switchover you can see people with their cars on waiting for the change to the other side. I mean, that increases pollution. So the question I have is, if you're going to talk about, and I don't disagree with this, if you're going to talk about putting effectively a toll on 59th, why not sort of not have the whole big conversation about 60th Street, all these other questions, and toll 59th Street, 3rd Avenue, Willis, McCombs, all of the bridges that come into New York. And this way you don't have to worry about which section and which area. It kind of solves the question about Manhattanites, because for the most part, you're already here. And I just don't understand if this is why this isn't part of a greater conversation, just literally tolling all of the bridges. And
I'll give you the simple answer to that.
Yeah.
That was one of the original congestion pricing plans, either, I forget if it was the 2008 one or the 2014 one, and it didn't go anywhere. So they had to come up with it.
But look at this thing. I mean, look how complex it's gotten. I mean, just because it was turned down at a different time in a different environment doesn't mean that you can't bring it up again. It doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. I mean, at that point, yeah, when they're talking about $2.50 a toll to come over, or whatever the number was, the 59th Street Bridge, and now you're talking about a significantly higher number. And like, are you going to let people off on 63rd? Are you going to let them go, south? You're going to go north? Why not take another look at this? I mean, that's real. If you really want to look at it, unlike London, where they have a drawn zone, we actually have the island, and it's a really easy thing to do. And I think it would make it so much simpler for people. And it doesn't have to be an onerous toll, but it should be just have a toll. And if I may, just one other side note regarding who gets to park if you do get into that. And I'll tell you, I come from Philly. In Philly, they have local residents are able to get a sticker for their particular area and put it on their car. So it doesn't matter what your plate is. You have a New Jersey plate. If you're in Philly, let's say you have a number 5 zone sticker, you get to park in that particular area. And it actually works pretty well in Philly, in downtown Center City, Philly. But that's not the big thing. The big question is the one about just why not revisit tolling all the bridges and not having to worry about zones and different times of day and who gets an exemption and who doesn't get an exemption. To me, that's a much simpler, straightforward solution.
All right, thank you, Evan. I appreciate your comments. I just like to remind everyone that I think as much as you may have a valid point there in terms of the complexities of this and that there are simpler ways to go about doing it, I think as we've said all along, we're forced to work within the confines of what the existing law is, and it's in all likelihood not going to be fruitful if we try to find ways to request that the law be amended in a major way. Unless we hear some indication from our relatively new governor at this point or anyone else that the entire policy is in question, it's better to work within the confines of the direction we're headed in, which unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, is very complex and involves all these nuances and a traffic mobility review board that is going to be making a lot of these decisions and potentially without as much public input from people like our community board and other community boards as we wish to see.
Maybe it's so complex because there are so many things going on within the zone. I'll just say this and then go back to people who have had their hands up. We have our whole cultural district is within the zone, or at most of it. Well, not Lincoln Center, but certainly Broadway theaters are. Broadway theaters drive, I don't know how many hundreds of millions or potential billions of dollars into the New York economy. And it's not just people buying tickets, it's the people who play in orchestras, it's the costumers and the set designers and the ushers and the restaurants. There's a tremendous amount of money that flows out of Broadway. I'm wondering if, and in London, as far as I know, the London West End is not within the city and not within congestion pricing, although most of the theater would be off-peak and on weekends there are Wednesday matinees. I'm just wondering about different issues, the small businesses that populate Midtown and downtown and Chelsea and Tribeca, if that exists in those other cities that were looked at. I don't know what those other cities are. And Evan, I think London, because traffic decreased and then it increased with more Ubers and Lyfts, they're thinking about instituting some, which we mentioned previously, some kind of fee based on miles driven. I don't know how that works, and I don't know if they know how it works yet. But anyway, let's go back to Alexander, and then we'll get to, you know what, and then we'll get to you, Michelle. Alexander, Evelyn, Leah, and then Michelle. And thank you for your patience, Michelle. Okay, Alexander, you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to come back to the bridge discussion, and it sounded like there were a lot of opinions about making sure that all of the different entrances and exits were told. My request is that we add to that list that Craig brought up earlier of like things to be considering and things to continue discussing. In the spirit of reducing congestion, tolling on the way in, sure, but not on the way out, giving people the opportunity to get off of Manhattan from uptown and not have to pay for the 15 feet they're going to be in the zone. The idea being that why are we penalizing? Why are we taxing folks who want to leave Manhattan if the idea is to reduce congestion in Manhattan? So I would just like to have that added to the list if that was possible. And then my other question is just if it's not in one of these meetings, how, and as someone who's fairly new and I haven't really joined before, how do I make my opinions known in outside of one of these meetings?
You could send an email to info@cb8m.com and ask that it be transferred to Craig and to me, but that all of this is supposed to be open meetings with fresh air. And so your opinion expressed outside of the meetings is not on the record in the same way that opinions expressed in the meetings, but these are all recorded and we take, and Craig is brilliant at this, extensive in minutes. He's been told that make it feel that people are here even when they haven't been at the meeting. So, excuse me.
That's fair. that I understand that. So then back to my original request that we add a consideration at least for the idea of not charging people to leave via the bridge.
Right. We'll have more, I guess, ways of organizing this and other discussions on all of the issues that were raised, and they were raised by people just like you in previous meetings. The list was compiled based on comments and remarks at other meetings, just in an effort to try and organize the discussion.
And Alexander,
sure, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
If you haven't already made your comments to the MTA, you can still submit that online through the MTA website, through their central district polling page.
I have, but I would also like for the community board to agree with me and propose a similar a similar opinion officially from a group like Community Board 8 would be more certainly have more weight than Alex hitting up the MTA on their form.
We're trying to get consensus on different points so that we could include them in a resolution. We have had on some of the procedural aspects with an additional one from tonight. So, and then the idea is to try and get through all of the substantive points that have been raised by either board members or people, members of the public at large, so that they could be included and we could have some resolution going to the powers that be that are actually responsible for all of this. And even
sure, but
just
I guess then my question is, does me making this comment add that to the list of considerations by default, or is there some sort of procedure that has to happen?
No, I've been keeping the list, so I've already noted it in the notes I'm taking as we speak.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. I think it's kind of intriguing, actually. Okay, let's go to Leah and then Evelyn, and then Michelle, you lowered your hand, but you still want to speak? Okay, I got it. Okay, Leah, you're unmuted.
Well, great, thanks. Great minds must think alike, because I was also going to bring up the issue of the Tri-Borough Bridge. If you live on the Upper East Side and you're going to Long Island, you have two choices, the 59th Street and the Tri-Borough, one of which is free now and one of which is not. I sometimes take the Tri-Borough because I'm trying to not contribute to traffic lower than I live. But if any kind of congestion pricing goes into effect, it's immediate and it affects the bridge. It's immediately going to shift traffic to the Tri-Borough, because why would you want to pay $30 to get to Queens when you could pay $5.50 on the Tri-Borough? So sometimes though, when you drive to the Tri-Borough, there's work being done on First Avenue or something, and there's a giant traffic jam there. But I haven't really heard that the plan for the congestion pricing zone is going to take into account the effect on the Tri-Borough Bridge. And I agree with Alexander that those two bridges really kind of need to be synced up, because otherwise we're just going to have unexpected traffic jams up north.
I think it's kind of hard, at least maybe there are models and things, but I think people can be unpredictable, or maybe that's just a detail. So hopefully, and maybe Craig, one of the things that we could talk about is the idea of having periodic reviews of the real impact of this, the practical aspects of this, and whether things as happening actually reflect things as predicted. I know it's something that we've talked about with restaurants. It's been an issue for a lot of people, the open restaurant plan, and it being looked at periodically. Maybe that's something that we could consider for this as well.
I don't know, the difference between a $30 toll and a $5.50 toll, it sounds pretty motivating to me. I can't imagine that people would not go to where the toll was cheap.
Well, it's happened in the city before, as I've mentioned. It happened when they told the Henry Hudson Bridge, people went to Broadway.
And that was $1.
Right. then. And Broadway had a lot of lights, so it was really different. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, Evelyn and then Michelle.
I don't think that's Evelyn. I think this is a different number.
Oh, different number. Okay,
yeah,
then whoever is, oh, it's a 212 number. Okay,
Yeah.
so whoever is 212 ending in 378. Thank you, Zachary.
Mhm.
You can please tell us who you are and then tell us what you're thinking.
Okay. My name is Colleen. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry for the confusion, Colleen. Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I've been sitting here listening to everybody like everyone else is doing. I live on the Upper East Side, and my husband is a restaurant owner. So he's a small restaurant owner. He owns a restaurant on the Upper East Side. And, you know, currently we are looking to open a second place. But we've been, you know, all through COVID and even a couple of years before that, we used to own on 2nd Avenue. We had to deal with the 2nd Avenue construction. We ended up closing our business because it affected our business. And then we reopened somewhere else. And currently, with, you know, between minimum wage and everything that happened with COVID, his you know, business expenses just to run the business have gone up about 40%. And, you know, so many of his friends are also restaurant owners. And as I'm listening, I'm even thinking of his other friend that has a couple small little restaurants in Midtown, and he lives in Queens. And I'm thinking, boy, and he has a place over at Bryant Park. But long story short, you know, the restaurant industry, and this even happened years ago when there was a gas hike. And I started getting all the invoices, and on there is a surcharge, $25 on every single invoice. Didn't matter how much you were ordering. So, you know, I am concerned about small businesses. I'm also concerned how is this going to affect it? And also, you know, talking about Broadway, he has customers that come in from New Jersey and Connecticut and Long Island, and they come to his restaurant and then they go to Broadway. So everything is a chain and all connected together. And so that's the business aspect of it. Also, you know, him and his friends that all own restaurants, they have their own car because you need some kitchen equipment, you got to go down to the Bowery. You need new chairs because your chair broke, you go down towards Delancey and down to the Bowery. You want to get fresh flowers and plants for your restaurant to make it look nice. You're driving down to the flower district. So you're using that as to help generate and to run your small business. And every dollar is so important. So with the increases and everything with COVID and everything else that happened, so what happens? You have to start cutting people's hours. It's already hard to find employees. He has one employee that loves working for him. 5 years he's been working for him. He drives in from New Jersey. He had taken a job in New Jersey and because he quit, and he came back to my husband saying, I really miss working here. Would you take me back? And my husband took him back. So see, there's so many things that I feel like politicians just don't consider. Also with the resident parking, you know, we do the alternate side of the street parking. You know, we're small business owners. I'm out of work because I'm in medical reasons why I can't work. And so we have to park on the street. And it's almost impossible those days that we need to use the car for the business and to come back up. And even within we have to go about 5-10 blocks from our house and go all the way east and all the way over to 5th Avenue and just kind of go back and forth until we find an empty spot. You either have to sit there and know when a doorman is leaving, when a construction truck is leaving, and with all the bike racks and so on. And on top of that, on Lexington and on 3rd, and it's the amount of FedEx trucks. Fresh Direct is one of the biggest culprits. I mean, they just they just take up the whole side street parking. and they put all their deliveries out on the avenue and they're taking up space. And then you have like Chick-fil-A and they have the big tent out and you have people double, triple parking. I just feel that there's so many things that are being missed that could help with cutting back on the congestion. Because if you go down Lex, it's basically one lane, because you have the bus lane and then you have everybody double and triple parking. So you're really squeezed down to one lane. Same thing with Park Avenue. I know with Ramaz, it's end of school. All the black SUVs are all double parked on Lexington, causing congestion. And I don't see why the people living in the city, or anybody who's not causing these issues, that we need to pay for that. But we need to think, that the state is going to pass it, but we have state people that do not live in Manhattan. They haven't lived here. They don't know what it's like the day to day, and what it entails to live here. So like you said, you're trying to present and try to make the best scenario that you can. And I just wanted to voice my concern as, my husband who's a small business owner and all his friends that are also small business owners of restaurants. They're very concerned. And as we're looking at another space to open up another business, I keep thinking in my head, well, how is this going to affect our business? How is this going to increase our cost even more? We don't know yet. And it's really deterring. And two of his friends, they're also shelving where they're looking to open up another business and if they want to open another business in the city, because they don't know how it's going to impact the small businesses with all their deliveries, their employees, and everything else that they need to take in consideration. And we have watched for many, many years of the plight of empty storefronts. We have the highest unemployment rate. And we really, I think it's really, truly going to be a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And I know that as for our maintenance in our building with our taxes and utilities and doorman contracts, our maintenance has gone up 100%. And so it's just another nail in the coffin. It's just like, really, we have to deal with another increase of something. So I liked the idea, as somebody said, and it's not going to happen, but with having a toll over every bridge, but it still affects the small businesses with their deliveries, because it's going to come down to them, and then they're going to have to raise their prices. Customers don't like when prices are raised, and they choose not to go in whatever case it is, whatever business it is. So I just wanted to put that out there as somebody who is a business owner, that business owners are very concerned of what this will do to their business bottom line.
Thank you, Colleen. The East Midtown Partnership, which is a bid that's mostly in CB6, just to the south of us from 59th Street, raised the issue of small businesses on the border where, as I mentioned, that bid is. So we have, as you could see from Craig's list, small businesses on our radar in terms of how they can be helped, and not fully knowing, of course, the impact of this. Thank you. Okay. Oh, do you have anything else to add? Okay, Michelle?
No, thank you. Thanks for letting me voice the concern on the business side of it. Yes.
Thank
you. I think Colleen eloquently described most of our lives. She got every category in there. And I, for one, can say that everything she mentioned directly affects my life on a daily basis. And I'm sure we're not alone. I also wanted to compliment Evelyn, because it was Evelyn's idea about putting parking lots on the Queens side of the bridge to alleviate, the issue of cars coming in. So she deserves some credit for that, and that's in the plan. I wanted to say, Craig, while you were talking, you mentioned that there are things that are already in the plan. So I was hoping that you could give like a brief summary of that, so we understand whether or not we should be commenting on those. Do they conflict with our list? Do we moderate our list? I would just like to sort of compare what's in there and what we have to deal with. And the other thing, I'm gonna say something and just throw this out. I have not thought it through, so economists will have to do that. But we're also worried about the double taxing. People are paying on the bridge, and they're going to pay when they come into the zone. And I think it's true on most bridges and tunnels that you do pay on the way in. You don't pay on the way out. I think they just charge you round trip for the way in, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, correct me, because that, as the other gentleman was saying, would make sense. But here's what
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's true on the Port Authority bridges, not the Triborough, and not the Midtown Tunnel, and not the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel.
Right. Thanks for clarifying. What do you all think about the issue of deductibility? In other words, we all pay taxes, so theoretically we're already paying for our roads. That's what we're being taxed for. If you think that there's going to be double tolling, it's a tax. The congestion pricing scheme is a tax. What about it being deductible against your other either road taxes, whatever it is, highway taxes? You have to differentiate between city, state, and federal. What about if you're paying multiple times for the same service, such as coming into the city and having to pay in multiple locations? As I said, I haven't processed it from an economist's point of view or from an accountant's point of view, but from a conceptual point of view, I think that might take the burden off people for what the actual cost is going to be to this thing. And actually, for a business, if it was a deductible item for a business, as for example, a part of their car, if a business owner has a car that they use partially for personal use and partially for business, they take a percentage of deduction. If they're trucking some of their items to a customer or from a supply house, that truck taking it somewhere is a deductible item. Well, why couldn't this be a deductible item for businesses or for people who have to routinely travel in and out of the zone, and for those who are also paying for other ways to get into the city? So I don't know where that falls on your list, if you think it's crazy. But I don't think, needless to say, it has to be thought through, but so does every single thing else that we mentioned. So this is not much different, but I think I wouldn't mind if you could include that somewhere.
I think
to be explored, I should say.
Well, I think my preference would be that we stick to what actually relates specifically to congestion pricing itself, because once you get into discussions regarding tax policy and budgetary policy regarding things that have nothing to do with congestion pricing, you're just, at least in my view, potentially opening a huge policy discussion that transcends congestion pricing and goes straight to the core of a lot of other policies. And it's not going to, I fear it's just going to bog us down and not allow us to focus on the more immediate issues at hand. I think I think we know your position on this, and this.
But aside from that, my position on it is I don't want it. But I'm trying to work within the parameters. But I think I'm saying tax deductibility for congestion pricing. That's what I'm talking about.
But that's not something that the Traffic Mobility Review Board has any authority over, and that's why I think this is not the
But-
place to be
Well,
having
you
that
don't really
discussion.
know that. Excuse me, Craig. I see your point, believe me, and I know it can be complicated, but every single thing on this issue is complicated. I don't think that's necessarily true. People work cross agencies. There are a lot of things that are happening. You really don't know how that would work, or whether or not they would consider it, or whether or not it would be sort of a bone to throw to those people who are concerned or in opposition or concerned about the cost of this, such as small businesses.
But
So
there-
if
Yeah, can I just read from the law itself? Because you asked what's in the law. So
Yes.
regarding the Traffic Mobility Review Board, it says the board shall make a recommendation regarding the central business district toll amounts to be established. And then it gives the details for purposes of recommending a central business district toll or tolls in addition to the goal of reducing traffic within the central business district. The board shall at minimum ensure that annual revenues and fees collected under such program, less costs of such program, provide for revenues into the central business district tolling capital lockbox established pursuant to whatever act it is. The board should consider for purposes of its recommendations factors but not limited to traffic patterns, traffic mitigation measures, operating costs, public impact, public safety, hardships, vehicle type, discounts for motorcycles, peak and off-peak rates, and environmental impacts, including but not limited to air quality and emissions trends. The board shall recommend a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions for tolls paid on bridges and crossings, which shall be informed by a traffic study associated with the impacts of any such credits, discounts, and/or exemptions on the recommended toll. And then the board shall recommend a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions for for-hire vehicles. And the board shall produce a detailed report that provides information regarding the board's review and analysis for purposes of establishing its recommendations, including but not limited to all the considerations referred to in this subdivision, this language. The board shall now recommend a toll that provides for charging passenger vehicles registered pursuant to charge vehicles more than once per day. So I guess this goes again to my point, which is the Traffic Mobility Review Board is relatively limited in terms of its authority and scope. And I think, at least my view is we should stick to that, because otherwise it's going to just, I fear that anything else would be lost in the shuffle.
if I can just respond to say one thing, to the extent that I could remember everything that you just said, there is an area in there that does talk about discounts. They may not use the word deductibility, but they're talking about exemptions and discounts and credits and all that. This could easily fall within that without any question. And if it's not relevant to them, then they will toss it out. But I think it can. In terms of motorcycles, I'm not sure why they single out motorcycles. In our comments, I would not want to see motorcycles get exempt. Why I understand they handle, one rider. They're small. They don't take up as much room as a car or a truck. I understand that, but they are extremely noisy. A lot of them do not have any noise mitigation, and they're certainly pollutants. And they're not even sure where they belong. They're supposed to be in the traffic lane because most of them can go more than 25 miles an hour, but we often find them in the bus lane and we find them in the bike lane. So I'm not sure why they are getting a courtesy and singled out. One thing they did in London, and I don't know that it worked out so well for them, is they gave discounts to electric cars. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that here is you have to have electric charging stations. I understand full well that that's a proposal that the city wants to see and actually has an amount set in mind. However, there is no discussion of how to increase the production of electricity. There are big warnings all the time. If we have a hot summer month, it's 95 degrees and everybody's got their air conditioning on. The big warning goes out to turn down your air conditioning because you're going to have a brownout. So now if you're going to have all these electric stations and they do not talk about increasing the capacity of the grid, So I want to see what they're doing about that. This is all part of the plan. You're talking about parking spaces where they're going to have charging stations. So you're going to have a car pull in and going to stay there for an hour or 2 hours or however much time, rather than having what's a gas station, maybe on either side, like we used to have on the west side and the east side. You'd have a gas station, you pull in and you get gas. Here you should pull in and charge your car. There should not be a station on the street. And that's going to add to a loss of parking and a loss of Midtown. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, they think, oh, Manhattanites don't drive. Manhattanites surely do drive. They do their errands, they go to theater, and they go to restaurants, and they surely do drive. And if they are not driving their car, they are taking a car. And that's the reason you have traffic. If nobody was in cars, you wouldn't have any traffic. I want to make one last comment about peak zones, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you're going to have this fiasco, there should be peak and high peak and low peak times. And I think the low peak times should cater to the entertainment industry. In other words, low peak for when Broadway is, so that you can drive into the zone, you can use those garages, you can park. A lot of people don't take public transportation there. They have to come home late at night. You certainly can't afford a cab anymore back and forth from the theater zone since they made plazas and turned 7th Avenue, which was a key access road to the theater district, since they turned it into a pedestrian plaza. And we've got one lane down to 46th Street, which then actually cuts off, becomes a plaza. All cars have to leave Broadway. You have to go down 7th Avenue South, come around the corner. That's great if you're in your car. If you're in a cab from the Upper East Side, you've got close to a $40 cab ride in each direction. That's not very appetizing for people. So I think, pricing in peak periods and lesser peak periods is something we have to think about. From a procedural point of view, are you planning to have a thought and then have a resolution on each issue? Or are you planning to come up with a list and have a vote? I mean, how are you planning to get this into a creative suggestion?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because I was actually going to, I hadn't even told Aaliyah what I was thinking, but I was going to just try to enunciate what I think is a potential pathway forward in terms of how we can think about our next meeting and how we may want to add more structure to this to hopefully allow us to move forward with things. If I'm hearing everyone correctly, and I'm hearing the concerns that are raised, it sounds as if there are probably certain potential recommendations that we may be able to discuss sooner because they are less contingent on the findings of the environmental assessment. And there are others that we may all benefit from more information before we weigh in on. So what I'm thinking about, and Alita, tell me how you feel about this. I'm thinking that maybe we look at our list again and try to pick out a few topics that we may want to discuss before the environmental assessment gets published, and before we have the chance to assess additional data. And at the same time, I was thinking that maybe I could develop a matrix of the suggestions that we have on the table so far that we are going to consider looking at further. And I could try to put together a list or try to put pen to paper and identify potential benefits or barriers or further questions that we would need to get to the heart of in order to potentially move forward with some of these things that we're considering. I think I have the ability to do that, just knowing a lot about the topic and knowing a lot about the issues. And I would hope that everyone could take me at my word that I will do this in a fair manner, and I will give equal emphasis to things that you may know that I agree with or don't agree with, but are all central to this, because I want to make sure that every issue is identified so that when we do come to decisions on each of these, that we have all the facts and questions in place, so we know what we're actually going to be recommending and what it means. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. And Alita, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think that would make sense.
I think for the parts that maybe we agree that we don't need further information or further studies, that we should organize it into specific areas and focus on each area moving forward, such as the bridge question, although I'm not sure that that doesn't need additional information, or such as residential parking permits. That could be a discrete conversation that's unrelated to other things, and we could submit, if we need to, multiple resolutions on different topics so that we could finish discussing a specific topic and then move on to the next, get all the comments. Granted, there are people who come and go from different meetings, but we'll never get anywhere if we don't focus on ways to discuss something. So you and I, Craig, after or at some point before the next meeting, can figure out how to organize and what kinds of things that we need. But I think if we just keep it, and this comes up with other committees as well, but if we just keep it unfocused, I think we're not going to get anywhere. We need to really tailor the conversation.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely. I think we need to just be more focused when we have our next meeting and try to attack those issues that we are able to at this point, and recognize that there are others where we at least are clearly thinking about them and trying to be prepared for the time where we may be able to move forward on them, but recognize that it may not be the appropriate time to do so as of yet. And as I do my analysis, I will try to identify the ancillary issues that may also be in play if we start talking about things. So if we need to consider those as well, we're prepared to, or recognize that they may come up. Like, for example, with residential parking, and we know how other cities have implemented the policy, but we would need to identify potential other laws or city policies that may need to be addressed in order to allow it to really occur, just as an example, as to how we would attack that. So we could talk about the benefits, the potential benefits of it, and if it were implemented, how it could potentially help matters, and also concerns that people have raised as to what the unintended consequences could be, and just have it all out there for people to see.
Exactly, and we could even list on potential unintended consequences in a resolution as areas to be considered. But even I think everything is overlaid with lots of questions. For instance, if we're talking about the impact on small business, well, what is a small business? How do you define that? And what are their hours? And how do you, so that there if we're talking about deliveries in the middle of the night or sometime after peak hours, well, how does it affect the small clothing store or the small shoe store or the shoe repair place that's not a CVS and Goldman Sachs, right?
Yeah, go on, I'm sorry.
No, so I was just going to say, it's like a spider web. And if you start to think about these things in detail, you get all kinds of things. And I'm not convinced that the people up in Albany, especially without Manhattan representation, if they move forward in that folly, have any idea how the city actually works, or how Manhattan works, and how the boroughs work, and how they all interact. And so they need to have things flagged, and they need to have questions raised, because who knows what they're actually thinking about.
Right. And I think it's important that, and I think this should be an offline discussion, and I welcome any input anyone has to just be sent to both Alita and I. But for any potential policy that we're considering, for anyone to suggest as to how it could realistically be implemented. So, for example, again, with small businesses, we could theoretically come up with a very broad suggestions saying we want to see small businesses be provided with some accommodations, but we'd want someone to help at least provide a framework for, well, how do you identify what a small business is? And in a law that could actually have teeth, how do you do it in a way that would allow for a small business to, say, apply for that exemption or accommodation, or would we be proposing such a program? I think we need to know exactly what my fear is if we're too broad, it's just going to get lost in the abyss because there isn't anything specific for people to respond to. They'll be like, oh, great. Yeah, it would be nice if we could help small businesses or nonprofits, but how do we actually do that in a way that it could be implemented and achieve the intended result? I think we need to be thinking about that from starting now.
We need to be very careful about, or not careful, but just selective. Let's go back to people who've had their hands raised for a while, Elaine and then Colleen. So Elaine, go ahead since you haven't. Well,
okay, I want to make a comment to what Michelle raised and then ask a question. In reference to public impact, and Craig, you mentioned it as part of the law. There are ways to do a deduction on the fees. One, the businesses will write it off as a business. But for those not businesses, New York State had for years a line on your taxes for the state for sales tax. And you could deduct your sales tax because we were being hit more than other localities. So there are ways to work that in and show a public impact and use the similar way that we did the sales tax deduction. My question is, we've been talking about traffic. I know an EIS is coming up. We know they're worth zero. We have not had any focus on the environment. The congestion pricing is two-pronged. Reduce traffic and help the environment. Yet all we're talking about is revenue that will be produced for congestion pricing. If we have no cars going in there, then we have no income. Just a thought. But two, are we going to have any response to asking for the data on really what impact the congestion pricing will have on reducing the pollutants in our area? And by the way, motorcycles are one of the higher producers of pollutants. But I put that out. We've had no discussion on the environment, and that's part of the congestion pricing. I leave that not for a discussion tonight, but I leave that as my question that I've been wanting to ask. Thank you.
Again, just to point out, in London, they've had mixed results. And so that's why I think they're looking to do something now. I know we had a presentation months ago from a professor in Illinois about different congestion pricing schemes around the world. I don't know enough about them to know how comparable they all are to the way New York City really is. And I'm just throwing that out there too. Colleen?
Okay, so hi again. Okay, so as you know, politicians and whomever else, anybody who's studying this and trying to implement this, you know, as everyone's saying, oh, well, this city has it and this city has it, but a lot of these cities are not an island like Manhattan. And as someone mentioned earlier, how all the boroughs and the tri-state area itself is all kind of molded and meshed together, and how every area depends on the other area and how all the revenue just kind of circles around where people live, where the businesses are, and so on. But I'm also listening, and okay, yes, it's right. No one talked about what is this going to do for the environment? Is it really going to help it? Because as they want to charge everyone coming and going, when we're already the highest tax, You know, we pay our federal, we pay our state, we pay our city. And then as a business owner, we have to pay our commercial real estate tax. So we are taxed up to the eyeballs. And and all the tax dollars really from the 5 boroughs fund the rest of New York State. The New York State now has dropped down to 19 million people. And Manhattan with the boroughs is what, 8.5, almost 9 million now? So half of the taxes are coming out of here. And we are paying the highest taxes. And we all know that people are leaving the state in droves. So what is the state going to do? Next time there's more people leaving from Long Island and upstate all over the place and they're moving down south, are they going to keep finding a way to keep taxing the people in the 5 boroughs? Because we are in an island. Where are we going to? We can't move further east or west, and we shouldn't have to move out of our homes. But at the same time, I'm from Buffalo and I grew up in Canada in the summertime. And you have the Peace Bridge going back and forth from Canada, and you have the Rainbow Bridge going back and forth over Canada, and you have the Whirlpool Bridge. They're $4 one way, and they have to share that revenue with Canada. So why is it that here in this area, we are paying, what, $16 or $18 for the GW? We have the Lincoln Tunnel, Midtown Tunnel. We have the Triborough, all these places that we are being charged so much, but yet you go to any other area within the state, and why isn't that they're not pulling their weight and helping put that money in the coffer that the state is supposed to be funding for the MTA and everything else? And also, are they reviewing and going to reconsider how de Blasio closed off 14th Street? And there's no exit at 14th Street after 9/11. And then also, as somebody mentioned, with the theater district in Times Square, I mean, we lost that thoroughfare. And then they implemented so many no turns. It's causing more pollution because now cars have to drive around and around. They have to go past how many streets to make another turn because of what time of the day, and they're driving around in circles. I mean, if it's truly, then, here at 86 and Lex, I can stand there and cars cannot even make a turn with the amount of people coming in and out of the subway and crossing the street. So you get one car to go through. Well, have they looked at every traffic signal and where we can improve these cars to be able to turn, but yet pedestrians to be able to cross safely? And if anyone remembers, in the 80s and the 90s, there used to be traffic cops with their whistles, getting everyone to move. You would not be able to double and triple park in this city 25 years ago at all. There was no way. So what else is getting looked at? Because I think a lot of residents' concern is, yes, it's another burden on people that live here. And as everyone has said, it's so interwebbed. There are so many details and who's going to get the exempts and all of this. It's like just the whole plan is just completely crazy. The whole concept doesn't work. And we're trying in a small little area of an island of Manhattan. We're trying to be friendly to mopeds. We're trying to be friendly to bicycles. We're trying to be friendly to this and that. We have to get our head out of the sand. And it's just not, you're never going to get rid of cars in Manhattan because we are an island. And not everybody has access to public transportation. And as someone with 2 girls, I really get worried about them even taking the subway. So sometimes we will use our car and I'll pick up my daughter with her friends and I'll drive them home, or their friends' parents will drive them home. And now what? I have to go just to go pick up my daughter because her friend lives on 33rd Street? The whole thing. And as I sit in and listen to everything, and I know it, like as somebody said, it's a very passionate, it's a very personal thing, but we just want to have our voices heard. But at the same time, this is not being put together properly. It's so ill-conceived that I really don't see a good way of implementing this program whatsoever. I feel like north, south, whatever, east, west, it's just going to cause more chaos. We already have chaos, and especially with delivery systems now, everybody knows. Everybody wants everything delivered. And now we have this, since they even thought about doing this, how many more delivery systems, how many more Ubers, how many more Lyfts, how many more Fresh Direct, how many more Grubhubs and Uber Eats and all this. It's just an influx of so many different factors that were not here 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Or even before.
And are these things being studied? How is this impacting? Why is it the residents are going to pay?
Well, there was a commuter.
That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. There was a commuter
No,
tax, but that went away. And one of our elected officials was asked about it at a time before the virus when we were meeting in person, and he said, never coming back. That's had an impact on the MTA and on city revenues, but I don't know. You raise a lot of questions about unintended consequences. That's why I wonder about asking for periodic reviews of this, although the infrastructure to get this set up is so costly, because unlike other things with potential periodic reviews, there's actual infrastructure, there's actual hard wiring, there's actual mechanics that need to be put into place. Craig, I had I don't remember. It was a question about but it's gone. So
I was just going to say, and I was trying to find the details, but I know we've talked about how upon implementation, there will be a study that will be performed by DOT that will assess the impacts of congestion pricing. So that is.
I do remember my question. When is that?
I don't remember offhand, but I thought it was within a year or two of the implementation of it.
And what will that include? Maybe it makes sense to ask for specifics about that so that we understand.
I just don't remember off the top of my head, and I couldn't locate it quickly enough to be able to.
No, that's okay. I don't expect you to know it now, but maybe that's something that we could talk about, is in terms of a subsequent analytical period and what they should be looking at and how frequently. I mean, we have asked for that for so many things. We've asked for air traffic studies after the Marine Transfer Station was put into practice. We've asked for, well, I've asked personally, not as part of the board, for periodic reviews of the open restaurants program, for instance. We asked for that, and they're included in other things. The thing I did want to ask you about, did you say from your reading of the act about congestion pricing that after costs, it has to reach $1 billion a year? Is it after costs? And do we have any idea what those costs are?
I'm trying.
I mean, not in terms of dollars and cents, but vaguely what the costs are and also what they include. I mean, that's huge. That number has got to be huge.
Well, I thought they had always talked about, it's not in the law, but I thought we had discussed in the past it being $1 billion annual. I forget if it was $1 billion annually or over whatever period of time.
I think
that would allow for $15 billion in bonding.
Right. So I thought it was annual $1 billion revenue, but it's net of costs. So that means I don't know how much more they have to bring in every day.
The board shall at minimum ensure that annual revenues and fees collected under such programs, less costs of such programs, provide for revenues into the Central Business District Tolling Capital Lockbox Fund. So I guess they are talking about net revenues.
So that's
now I don't know. I don't know if that includes the capital expenses in order to build the system or not. I would assume, I don't actually know if it would or not, but I think there clearly is language in here speaking that it is a net revenue to some extent.
So then after people, if the program works and people stop driving, they have to spread the cost out over fewer cars or trucks or Ubers or delivery vehicles or small business trucks. And therefore the fares, the fees are going to be even higher on each individual that goes into the zone. And some people live there and they have their cars parked. So are they going to have to pay more? Small business deliveries? I mean, I don't know how all of this, I know you don't know either, but.
No, I was going to say, I think that's why it's important that we understand what the baseline conditions are, and the environmental assessment should spell that all out. I don't think, I know someone mentioned earlier the suggestion that the fees could or should be $80 per vehicle. I think that's a far-fetched idea. I saw that opinion column. It was from a professor at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. So it's not an official policy under consideration. But I think, yeah, the fees are going to have to be dictated in a manner that achieves the revenue goals. And I think they've always been clear about that.
Right, but those will change at some point if this program is successful. I don't know. I think it's really revenue driven, and it will be a huge burden on people if their goal of getting cars off the street is actually achieved to some degree. But I have no idea what the numbers are, and that's just I'm sorry, I shouldn't be wearing a chair hat. It's just my personal opinion, although a lot of people do subscribe to the idea that it's primarily revenue creating. But let's go to Michelle and then figure out how to proceed from here. Michelle?
Yeah, I know. I was going to just say, yes, it's a defeating, in other words, the success of the program will cause a downswing of the revenue, which is exactly what they're trying to maintain. It's contradictory. It was from day one. If the program is successful and cars significantly don't go into Midtown anymore, then revenue goes down, and that's the whole point of the program. It's a defeatist thing. It only works if cars keep pouring into the district, and that's what they claim they don't want. So this was apparent from day one. It didn't make much sense. And the only way they solve it is by raising the price. I threw out that $80 because it was just thrown out in that article. I didn't mean to suggest that was a realist thing. It was just this guy was analyzing it and saying for it to actually make sense financially, the cost would have to be something like that. That would never fly. And considering that the cost is probably going to be $13, $14, $15, which is what they're throwing out there. Years ago, when Bloomberg first presented this, I was on the board. It came to the Transportation Committee. We voted it down. It quickly died. He started with a $9 fee. And it was obvious in very early stages of discussion that was going to have to increase on a regular basis if what they want to achieve is true. So to me, the whole program is contradictory. So, but I'm trying to work within your parameters because it seems to be it's going to happen. As you all know, if I had my druthers, it would never happen. But I'm trying to see what's feasible if it does end up happening. And the more I think about it, the more things that I come up with trying to make it feasible, the more I realize that there's more things that will make it unsuccessful. I can't seem to come to a point where I say, oh, well, if we do it this way, it's going to be great. No matter what question I raise for myself in my own personal analysis, I come up with another problem that's going to be caused. It's going to be self-defeating. But anyway, everybody's got great thoughts. So let's see if we can all be really brilliant about this.
Thanks, Michelle. One question I have, Craig, is if someone doesn't drive and takes public transportation, how many trips would be the equivalent of a car paying the fee? Because the MTA will get revenue from someone taking the subway. It's less costly because now they're not having license plate readers or any of the mechanics of that. But does someone who would normally drive in just take 2 trips on the subway, a back and a 4th trip? Is there something else that they might do? I mean, I wonder what the equivalents are and if there's some way to balance for that so that when they're looking at costs, they're also considering additional revenue to the MTA through fares. I don't know. Is that a legitimate question?
Yeah, I guess it is. I'm not sure if of how the correlation would work. I mean, theoretically, obviously, if you're taking cars off the road and people are going to be using public transportation, the revenues will come into play. I just don't know that there's a mechanism for those fare box revenues to be viewed in the context of congestion pricing. I don't know how that relates to the law.
But maybe they should be. Maybe if the goal here is to produce a certain amount of revenue to enable the bonds to be paid off or to secure the bonds, then additional revenue should be considered. Maybe that's something, if everyone wants, we should ask for. I don't know.
It also, the flip side to that is, if I'm not mistaken, the fare box revenues support the operating expenses while congestion pricing supports the capital program. So they are going into 2 different pools, if you will.
Well, there must be something so that people who have to drive, even if those who want to drive are somehow dissuaded from driving every time they want to, the people who have to are not being hit with higher and higher and higher fees as the people who want to are no longer driving. And maybe that's something that we should look at. It's a procedural thing. And, there comes a point where people will be, I think, driven out of the city. We've heard from people. We heard from a mother really early on who drives her kids to school within the zone, who said that this could be enough to force her to leave. I imagine there are people not at our meetings who may have that. Yes, I know that some people embrace this for its environmental impacts, for its congestion impact, for parking impact within the zone. But at what point, what is the tipping point to drive people or small businesses? If people are holding off opening small businesses here because of that, and we all know that small businesses are essential to the vitality of the city, as well as neighborhood necessities such as shoe repair and dry cleaner and grocery stores, at what point is that something that's not fixable anymore, that people are just going to leave, or they're just going to open their businesses in one of the boroughs or one of the suburbs, as well as people moving to other states that don't have the kinds of taxes that we have? I don't know. These are all just questions. So having said that.
So with that, I think looking forward to the next meeting, we should, as we discussed, go over our list, try to whittle down what we can do in the near term, try to expand on the ideas that we have to be able to present them in a way where we can at least prepare for when the environmental assessment is released, and we can then move forward when we have enough information and sort of organize our approach going forward as to how we're going to look at each of the ideas that have been suggested so far, and try to think whether we need to make them more specific or change language in a way to make them more potentially feasible and implementable as a recommendation.
Right. I mean, this is certainly complicated, and how to approach it is complicated. So and how much to share in terms of what they may not know about what it's like for people in Manhattan and the boroughs. Michelle, you have your hand up again. Could you unmute, Michelle?
So thank you. So just want to say a very thoughtful and a very fair and a very comprehensive meeting. So I want to compliment the co-hosts, and then I want to move to adjourn if everybody's comments are finished.
Thank you for both. Any last comments? Any second on the motion to adjourn? I think Barry seconds. So having said that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all. We'll see you next month. Got to get some.
Everyone, go celebrate Pi Day and have pizza.
Yes, happy Pi Day, everyone. Pizza pie.
Or pie pie.
Or pie. But at least you have pizza pie. I forgot it's actually a pie. Happy Pie Day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Good night. And thank you, Zachary. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.